The story opens with the arrival of an enormous intergalactic kaiju on Earth. That alone would have been enough to shatter human society, but it was only the beginning. Before long, a continuous flood of kaiju appeared, all determined to erase humanity. In response, the nations of the world united their best people and their best technology to form a defense force known as Erde, a last line of protection against the end of the world. Erde achieved some victories, but the cost was devastating. Even with their successes, the war dragged on and on, with no clear end in sight. Then, at a time when hope was beginning to feel scarce, a young savior appeared. His name was Tatsuo. Tatsuo is first shown watching other children as they play together. He is shy and withdrawn, and when the other kids invite him to join, he immediately runs away instead of staying with them. One day, Tatsu finds a robot that is protesting against robot violence. The robot insists that it has rights and says that it refuses to self-destruct. Soon after, the lead researcher Kojika arrives, and the people around him explain that they are locked out of the lab. The robot immediately identifies Kojika as the main problem and says that this man wants it to charge into the kaiju and explode. Kojika does not deny it. He explains that the robot is only a prototype, but that it will be used as an autonomous bomb to eliminate kaiju without causing human casualties. To him, that makes it a brilliant innovation. If more of these units can be mass-produced, then the war against the kaiju may finally be turned around. The robot says that it simply wants to live, and Tatsuo clearly sympathizes with that. Then the alarm bells start ringing across the city. The kaiju are attacking again. The researchers begin running for their lives, but Tatsuo stays behind to talk to the robot. Kojika stays as well, because he wants to test a robot he calls Snowman. However, he is suddenly informed that his son has climbed aboard Snowman and taken manual control. Inside the machine, Tatsu is reading the instruction manual. Snowman is panicking, unable to understand why a child is inside the cockpit. He tells Tatsu that he should not be there, because it is far too dangerous. Nearby, Kojika explains that the cockpit was only installed for training purposes. He never expected anyone to actually use it. Snowman is nearly impossible to control, and even Kojika admits that only a genius could operate it properly. Unfortunately for him, Tetsuo really is a genius, and he quickly takes control of the robot. Snowman begs him to stop, warning him that there is a real chance the machine could explode. Tetsuo calmly answers that he will make sure it does not have to lose its life. The researchers are stunned when Tatsuo launches Snowman into the air. Kojika cannot understand what is happening at first, and only then does he realize that his son is a genius. Hours later, the news spreads everywhere. A robot still under development has managed to defeat a kaiju by itself, and even more shocking, the pilot is only 9 years old. Kojika tells the world that it was his son who did it, and that the robot he used can also explode. On social media, people start calling them saviors and asking whether they will keep fighting. Kojika immediately changes his tone. He now says, of course they will continue, and he proudly calls Snowman some kind of disposable bomb. Meanwhile, Tatsuo is having a full panic attack because everyone around him is staring. As time passes, he continues to become more famous. His heroic actions become more and more frequent, and we can see him growing older. Snowman receives several upgrades, and the war moves closer to its final phase. Tatsuo keeps dominating the kaiju, and everyone becomes convinced that their savior will eventually bring peace to humanity. 10 years later, Tatsuo is aboard an intergalactic cruiser, reading a book called 777 Steps to Making Friends. Before he can even get through the first step, an announcement informs everyone that there are 40 minutes left until the final battle. Tatsuo is called to board Snowman once again. On the way, some girls tell him that they are counting on their savior. Tatsuo says he will do his best, then goes off to prepare. He launches himself into space and tells Snowman that he now calls him Yu-O, letting him aboard as always. Yukio, the robot, is deeply disappointed because he can tell that Tatsuo once again ran away from human interaction. Tatsuo wishes he had stayed calm when talking to the girls, and he cannot believe how awkward he is. After spending all his formative years fighting kaiju, he still does not know how to speak to people properly. Yukio tells him not to give up and to keep trying to make friends. Tatsu says he is fine because he has Yu-Gi-Oh, but Yukio points out that he has been saying that for 10 years. Tatsuo explains that making friends is difficult because you have to clear 777 hurdles first, according to the book How Even a Kaiju Can Make Friends. So Tatsuo concludes that it may already be too late for him. Just then, Tatsuo's captain, Mist, informs the crew about the current situation. Their ship will soon arrive at the kaiju horde. When they reach the target zone, Tatsuo will break away from the ship, while the ship heads toward the center of the horde. There, they will fire the Infinity Laser, a weapon powerful enough to inflict damage across a 1,000-kilometer radius and wipe out the entire kaiju horde. The only problem is getting there in time. That is where Tatsuo comes in. Yukio tells everyone not to worry because he and Tatsuo will go on a rampage together. They will draw the enemy in and cut down the swarm. The meeting ends and Tatsuo realizes that he has once again messed up a human interaction. Instead of saying yes ma'am like a normal person, he only said a short, awkward reply. Yukio is not concerned because all he wants is for them to return home with a victory. Their dream seems close, but suddenly it is interrupted as several kaiju appear. The rest of the crew is horrified by how many of them there are. It is an endless sea of massive kaiju. Everyone is ordered to begin the mission. Tatsuo pauses for a moment, reminding himself that he wants to become someone of value. Yukio calls out that the enemy has arrived, and Tatsuo's expression changes completely. He confidently says it is time to go. Tatsu activates his 7-sword style, and the attack leaves everyone amazed as he destroys several kaiju with a single strike. Mist reminds everyone that Tatsu is their savior and that victory is still possible. Eventually, they arrive at the launch point. Mist tells everyone it is time to save the planet. The Infinity Laser begins charging, forming a giant sphere of energy in front of the ship. She gives the order to fire, but everyone is stunned when the attack simply vanishes. They are then informed that the laser system has crashed and can no longer fire. Mist does not even understand how that could happen, because it has never happened before. She gathers herself and orders everyone to switch to Plan B. They must hold back the kaiju and recall Tatsuo and Yukio. But that also goes wrong. The ship begins shutting down, the attack systems stop responding, and the barrier generators fail as well. Things turn terrifyingly dark when the ship's defenses are completely wiped out. Mist can only watch in horror as the kaiju slam into the ship. Crew members are pulled out into space, and Mist screams as her life ends in an instant. Tatsuo watches in shock as the ship explodes. Yukio cannot believe it either. He wonders if this means humanity has lost. Tatsuo tells him to calm down so they can head back to the ship. If even one person is still alive, they have to save them. Yukio is still scared, but Tatsuo insists that the mission is not over yet. They will keep fighting together and defeat the rest of the kaiju. Hours later, Tatsuo is completely exhausted after eliminating several kaiju, but there are still far too many remaining. Yukio has taken severe damage and is even missing an arm. At this point, Yukio starts losing hope, realizing that there may simply be no way to win. Tatsuo has no choice but to agree. They gave it everything they had. The only thing left to do is reduce the kaiju to a manageable number for the surviving forces on Earth. To do that, they must activate Yukio's self-destruct mechanism. Tatsuo hates the idea because he promised Yukio that he would never have to do this. But they both understand they have no other choice, so Tatsuo tells him it is time to save Earth together. As the kaiju continue attacking Yukio's body, he makes light of the situation. He jokes that in the end, he never managed to make even one friend. Tatsuo does not want to be mocked right now, because he is searching for the self-destruct command. He also says he does not mind dying without a human friend, because he still has Yukio. Yukio asks whether Tatsuo truly has no regrets. Tatsuo is not sure. He thinks back to his life and remembers spending most of it fighting kaiju. Somewhere along the way, seeing other people with friends stopped hurting as much. Eventually, he simply stopped caring. So he tells Yukio that he is okay now and thanks him for staying with someone like him all this time. Yukio is grateful too because Tatsuo treated him as more than just a bomb and gave him a real name. Tatsuo then notices that Yukio has gone quiet and he is shocked by what happens next. Yukio suddenly takes full control of himself and says that there is something he feels guilty about. Tatsuo desperately tries to regain control because he understands what Yukio is about to do. Yukio explains that his crime was stealing from Tatsuo by forcing him to spend the last 10 years not living a normal life. He blames himself for making Tatsuo fight kaiju and nothing else. Tatsuo insists that he is fine being with Yukio and would not choose anyone else. He begs Yukio to give the controls back, but it is already too late. Yukio activates the emergency escape pod for Tatsuo and a countdown begins. Yukio says he could never allow Tatsuo to die because Tatsuo was the one who gave him life. The countdown ends and Tatsuo is launched to safety inside the escape pod. Tatsuo screams for Yukio, knowing there is nothing he can do. Yukio reveals that his true dream is for Tatsuo to return to Earth and finally live a happy life. He wants him to make many friends, lots and lots of them. Tatsuo begins to cry. He promises Yukio that he will do exactly that and will make at least 100 friends. Yukio says he is relieved, and those turn out to be his final words. His self-destruction activates and wipes out the kaiju horde. Sometime later, the pod exits cold sleep as Tatsuo reaches his destination. The current location is the Tokai region in Japan. The screen tells him that he was in cold sleep for 8 years. Tatsuo is horrified because that means it has been 10 years since he left Earth. He is technically an adult now, even though he has not physically aged, and he wonders whether he will still be able to make friends like this. He briefly imagines a plan to stay shut inside his room in total isolation, collecting information about the new world before stepping outside to meet people. When Tatsuo leaves the pod, he is stunned by something completely unexpected. A huge crowd begins cheering for him. They call him their savior, and everyone says they want to be his friend. Tatsuo is overwhelmed with happiness and tells Yukio that he kept his promise. But this turns out to be only a daydream he is having, a hopeful version of how things might go. The truth is far worse. Tatsuo is shocked when he sees the real world around him. It is completely frozen over, even though it should be summer. The scene is horrifying because the entire planet has been covered in ice. Tetsuo returns to Earth only to find a planet locked in ice. At first, he tries to believe that maybe only Shizuoka has fallen into a frozen state, but when he goes back into the cabin and checks a live image of the world, he realizes the truth is far worse. The entire Earth is frozen. In just 10 years, civilization has been buried under ice, even though the FDAK had once been thriving. What hits him just as hard is the promise he made to Yukio. He was supposed to come back and make friends, yet this world looks as if no one is left alive. The story then shifts into a dream. Tetsuo sees himself back at school in the infirmary, sitting quietly and repeatedly drawing the moon symbol. Some students whisper about how strange it is to see Yabi-sama practicing calligraphy there, when the savior is not even allowed to attend school in the first place. To them, plenty of kids would gladly trade places with him just to avoid studying, and yet he keeps doing something so odd. In the middle of that dream, Tetsuo sees a strange image of his father, who tells him that he is important because of what he is capable of doing. But before the scientist can explain exactly what he means, Tetsuo wakes up. He wakes 22 hours later with a brutal hunger and assumes there must be food stored in the back of the cabin. As he stands, he accidentally presses a button that activates a recorded message from Yukio. In the message, Yukio says his real dream was never about high-quality oil. What he truly wanted was for Tetsuo to return to Earth and live a normal, happy life full of friends. Encouraged by Yukio's words before the explosion, Tetsuo puts on heavy winter gear, eats, and heads outside to search for another survivor. In his mind, the answer is hidden in the book he has read again and again, the one about how even a kaiju can make friends. According to that book, the first step is simply leaving home and trying to socialize. Not long after setting out, Tetsuo suddenly detects an old man nearby, which shocks him because he never expected to find anyone so quickly. But since he has almost no social skills, he trips in the snow and crashes into the man, who immediately crumbles apart like a statue made of clay. Faced with that grim moment, Tetsuo gives the man's remains a proper burial and quietly offers him respect. He also notices that the old man had been standing on a small excavator that still works and still has fuel. That changes everything. Tetsuo now has a machine he can ride through the frozen world, and as he travels, he slowly learns how to control the shovel. It quickly becomes clear that the excavator will be essential if he wants to survive the Ice Age. While driving, he comes across a gigantic hole in the ground. Since he is desperately searching for some kind of shelter where humans might still be living, he reasons that underground might be warmer and more habitable than the surface. He moves closer and prepares to call out in case anyone can hear him, but then his extreme shyness gets in the way. He cannot even imagine shouting to a crowd of strangers. In his mind, no one would ever want to be friends with someone as awkward as him. He starts thinking that maybe if any animals are still alive, he could at least make friends with a dog or a cat. That line of thought is cut short when an intergalactic kaiju suddenly appears. Faced with a creature that massive, Tetsuo can only scramble into the excavator and try to flee. The problem is obvious. The machine is far too slow to outrun the beast, and it is nowhere near strong enough to fight it head-on. As he tries to escape, he tumbles into another hole and crashes hard below. When he regains his bearings, he realizes he has landed in exactly the kind of underground human settlement he had hoped to find. But even there, the ice has already spread. Houses, apartments, everything is frozen solid. Tetsuo even feels as if he may be close to his own home, and the sight of the ruined environment hits him hard. Then the ground starts shaking. The kaiju is coming. Even with the odds against him, Tetsuo decides to fight. He raises the mini excavator and faces the beast directly. The creature is enormous, but Tetsuo has one advantage. He can think, adapt, and recalculate in real time. After taking the first attack, he realizes the kaiju strikes move in straight lines, making them relatively easy to dodge, even if he still has no reliable way to counterattack. Using his skills as a pilot, he begins to control the excavator with more precision, using the shovel as both shield and weapon while searching for a way to win. Still, it is an uphill battle. The kaiju's strength is overwhelming, and the excavator's shovel starts taking serious damage. Tetsuo needs a solution fast. Ironically, losing the shovel gives him one. What remains becomes a long, sharp stake. Suddenly, he has something like a lance. Remembering his father's words that he is important because he can kill kaiju, Tetsuo charges straight forward and drives the stake into the monster's mouth at full speed, piercing its head from the inside. The jaws clamp shut around him, trapping him in place. Then 3 humans arrive. 2 of them are stunned to see such a giant kaiju and immediately think the demolition squad will go crazy when they hear about it. One of the women says they have struck gold, and the other 2 celebrate so hard that they toss Chief Noi into the air. But that excitement ends the instant Tetsuo bursts out of the kaiju's mouth in the strangest way possible. After believing he was alone in the world, Tetsuo is overjoyed to see other people. Unfortunately, he is soaked in blood and staggering around like a monster. The man and the little girl hide behind Chief Nogi as if she were a shield, and they only calm down when Noi snaps back to reality and shouts that this weirdo is actually human. Tetsuo tries to remember the next step from his friendship guide. After meeting someone, he is supposed to smile. But the way he forces that smile only makes him look even creepier. Exhausted and unable to stay upright, he collapses. The story flashes back again, showing Yukio complaining about one of Tetsuo's self-help books and arguing that those books are not nearly as practical or objective as they claim to be. Tetsuo insists that this one is trustworthy because it was written by Lonely Awaki, a man supposedly famous for having millions of friends. Yukio remains unconvinced. Tetsuo then admits that he is stuck on step 2. When he reads the step aloud, he realizes he cannot imagine doing it with a stranger. Worse, he thinks nobody would find him interesting unless Yukio were by his side. When Tetsuo wakes up again, he discovers that the step he thought was impossible is simply introducing yourself. He looks around and realizes he is inside a frozen cave. At first, he thinks he must have been dragged into the kaiju's lair, but then he remembers seeing survivors. When he turns around, he finds an entire team dismantling the dead kaiju. Dozens of workers are cutting it apart for resources, though Tetsuo has no idea yet what they are making from it. Even so, his goal has not changed. He still wants to make friends. He tries to get up, only to notice that his arms have been tied behind his back. But years of handling brutal G-forces while piloting Yukio have dislocated his shoulders before, so he uses that painful experience to swing his arms forward like a ragdoll and free himself enough to move. Elsewhere in the cavern, Mishima, the leader of the dismantling squad, is thrilled because the carcass provides leather, meat, and bones, and everyone at the center will be excited about such a huge haul. Noi wishes she could claim credit for finding it, but she knows that is not possible. Nishimura tells her the report will not mention who discovered it anyway. As usual, Nogi had wandered off exploring without permission, and once again the squad leader has to cover for her. If the elders learn that their star keeps sneaking out every night to explore the kaiju cave, they will lose their minds. Noi says the important thing is to keep fighting. Hearing that makes Nishimura emotional because he remembers when she was just a little girl crying all alone. Noi complains that she is not a child anymore and reminds him that she already has subordinates under her command. Right then, those two subordinates come running in to report that the tied-up stranger has escaped. The funny part is that Tetsuo has not actually run away. He is taking the whole friendship idea far too seriously, so instead of fleeing, he stays right there near the people who tied him up because he still wants to make a new friend. As he watches the workers carve up the monster and use every part of it with limited tools, he realizes that in a world buried under ice, a kaiju can be an incredible source of survival materials. Tetsuo is deeply moved by how strong and resourceful these people are, but his emotional moment is interrupted when a small child starts hitting him with a toy robot that looks a lot like Yuko. Not knowing what else to do, Tetsuo instinctively extends his hand. The child just laughs, calls him a weirdo, and runs off. Tetsuo accepts it without complaint. Then, danger strikes. An icicle is about to fall on the boy's head. Tetsuo dashes forward, grabs one of the giant bones taken from the kaiju, and uses a robot sword technique to shatter the icicle before it can hit the child. The boy immediately bursts into tears. His father, who had been working nearby, rushes over, hugs him tightly, and lightly scolds him for wandering under the icicles again. At the same time, a pair of twin workers thank Tetsuo for stepping in. They mention that the boy's father has been more emotional than usual because he recently lost his wife. Then they study Tetsuo more carefully and ask who he even is, since they have never seen him in the shopping district. Being put on the spot instantly drags Tetsuo back into his loneliness and social anxiety. He can barely answer through his stuttering, but the boy's father shuts the twins down with a knock on the head. He says the young man must have his reasons, and since he just saved Joji, where he came from does not matter. Then he reaches out his hand and introduces himself as Takamura, Joji's father. Tetsuo is too nervous to shake it, so Takamura simply stretches his hand farther and completes the greeting for him. In the end, awkward as it is, Tetsuo finally manages to achieve the step he thought he never could. He introduces himself. After learning his name, Takamura promises to reward him with the finest cuts of kaiju meat for saving Joji. The twins warn that Nishimura will kill them if he finds out, but Takamura just says they are all involved now, so they had better keep quiet. Not far away, Noi and her two subordinates watch the situation from a distance. One of the large men asks whether they should not just recapture the stranger immediately, but Noi tells Furami that their real job is to handle threats to the mall. Since the demolition squad is already welcoming him, they can hear his story afterward. So Noi calls the two over to help with the dismantling. But at that exact moment, another kaiju suddenly appears inside the cavern. The instant Tetsuo sees it, even he is stunned, because the creature's bone structure looks completely unfamiliar, unlike anything he has ever encountered before. If you enjoyed the story, be sure to subscribe so you do not miss the next part.